The new proposed development is another example of continuing urban sprawl in Barrie. More than 120 acres of land on two different sites on Lockhart Road will be developed. Around 40 acres of total land is an environment protection zone that cannot be developed. The proposed site is in Councillor Sergio Morales' Ward number 9. He has been a big proponent of multi-storied mixed-use development to solve the housing crisis and make Barrie more walkable. However, the developer is not planning to go in that direction. The developer is planning to build around 600 units, including single detached, semi-detached, and townhouses. Ray Duhamel of the Jones Consulting Group presented the plan on behalf of the developer. During the same meeting, there was another mixed-use development proposal on Huronia Road in Ward 9. The plan is to build a multi-tenant building, a restaurant, convenience store, gas station, and a car wash. Councillor Morales again asked why there is no plan to build big 5 or 6-story buildings. The planner responded that there is a technical limitation based on the soils, and the developer will have to go through a longer process to do commercial development on the land designated as light industrial. Recently, there has been organized efforts by residents to stop large development in their neighborhood. At the end of two presentations, Councillor Anne-Marie Kungl asked if the city is prepared to convert gas stations into electric charging stations amid rising electric car sales, and if native species can be cultivated in the environment protection zone to deal with the climate change. The city does not seem to have any plans to address either of the issues.
Thank you for the opportunity to present this evening. My name is Ray Duhamel with the Jones Consulting Group. I'm presenting this evening on behalf of two companies, Lockhart Innisfil Investments Limited and Lockhart Innisfil Investments II Limited. And they, as noted in the preamble to this public meeting, is they own lands on Lockhart Road that are known as 460 and 560 Lockhart Road. And this public meeting will consider a proposed zoning bylaw amendment. And there's a companion draft plan of subdivision applications that I will detail as well. Okay, this first slide is an aerial photograph of the area. The properties 460 and 560 Lockhart outlined in red. If you can see my cursor, the southern boundary is Lockhart Road. The nearest major intersection is Yonge Street and Lockhart Road, which is here. And the community of Stroud is to the south. This is the boundary of the town of Innisfil and the city of Barrie, which also coincides with the settlement area boundary from a planning perspective. The lands themselves, 460 Lockhart has just over 32 hectares of land and just under 500 meters of frontage. And 560 Lockhart has just under 20 hectares of land and about 330 meters of frontage. And this is a quickly evolving area. I'll show you that in a moment. But the lands to the west are known as the Sorbera subdivision. That land is draft plan approved and zoned for residential use, parks and other things. And that's proceeding through the detailed design and almost finalized their detailed design and getting engineering conditions. So that'll go to registration this year. And then the lands to the north, both BEMP and GG 9 Mile, phase one of both of those subdivisions has proceeded to registration. And there's a lot of construction ongoing, as I'm sure anyone who's seen driving along Mapleview Drive will know. Lands immediately to the east are Mattamy Homes. You may recall, your worship, members of the planning committee, I presented a public meeting for this application, I think in October of last year. So that'll be proceeding with hopefully moving forward with draft plan approval and consideration of zoning approval this year in maybe the second quarter. And then to the east is Rain Song Development, which is a second phase of their lands. Their first phase is already up here. It's draft plan approved. And then this is the second phase ultimately here. So I think it gives you a good context of what's going on in the area. And of course, across the street, being in Innisfil, outside of a settlement area, is agricultural lands. These pictures on this slide illustrate effectively the existing conditions that have historically existed on this land for many, many decades. That's dominated by agricultural land as a placekeeper for new development that's going to occur. There are some hedgerows and some environmental protection lands that I will also speak to in a moment. This next slide is the area context. This first slide in the top left is the lands under construction by GG 9 Mile that is registered and home construction is commencing. Lands to the east are the vacant Mattamy Homes site that I just spoke about. Lands to the south are agricultural, lands to the west under construction, which represent the Sorbera subdivision. In my opinion, the applications are consistent with the provincial policy statement and conform to the growth plan and the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan, and the planning report in support of these applications details on a full policy framework, the policy analysis for each of these documents. This next slide is the Hewitt secondary plan. It commenced in 2000, the planning for this area. It was ultimately approved by council in 2014 and approved by the former, what used to be called the Ontario Municipal Board in 2016. It's a community that will house about 26,000 people with a wide variety of land uses and institutional uses, different residential housing types, commercial, stormwater management ponds, etc. You will see that the subject lands are in red, as shown here. Again, for orientation, this is Lockhart Road, and Yonge Street is the north-south road right here. And so on this lands, there's two primary designations, the green, which is a natural heritage designation or environmental protection, and then yellow, which is the residential area. There's also the illustration of how the city anticipated the road network extending through this site, and I'll show you that on the actual plans of subdivision. And then the purple area down to the southwest is a neighborhood mixed use area. That's the policies allow for mixed use or standalone residential at medium or higher densities. So you've heard me say this many times before, I'm sure, but the start of the process in the Hewitt secondary plan area is to submit a conformity application to the city. That conformity application provides the city with an opportunity to review basically a preliminary plan on the lands, to review things such as the stormwater management areas on a very conceptual level, the natural heritage areas, the street layouts and orientations, and the lotting and other uses, to confirm that they conform, hence the word conformity application and conformity plan, with the master plan contained in the Hewitt's secondary plan. And that application was made, and the city confirmed that the application conforms to the master plan in the summer of 2020. Following that, and I'll get into the details of this because the subdivision effectively mirrors the conformity plan. But following the approval of the conformity plan, there was a series of technical works and plans that were prepared over the course of a little over a year. And then the applications in the fall of last year were submitted for subdivision and rezoning, two separate. Again, this is a combined public meeting, but separate applications for 460 and separate for 560. And each of these plans are available on the city's website for review. And if there's any comments that you had, you could review those and provide comments to the city's file manager, Shelby White. This slide is the first plan of subdivision, which is 460 Lockhart Road. You will see that the largest block represents the environmental protection lands, which are in green. That's about 12 hectares of land that will be conveyed to the city of Barrie for perpetual stewardship. Two large stormwater management ponds that are located, the color is blue. And this one in particular services, as you can see, there's just a small stormwater management pond component on here on the adjacent Sorbera plan. So this pond serves this site as well as the Sorbera site to the west. In terms of road pattern, there's a single access located off of Lockhart Road, which will be called Ball Gate. That's a major collector, if you can see my cursor, and then connecting to what's called Fenchurch Manor, which will connect eastward and ultimately up to Madeline Drive. And it will continue westward through the Sorbera subdivision and actually into the adjacent existing subdivision that's over there. And then in terms of units themselves, I'll get into stats in a moment, but there's a variety of units proposed in this plan. There's dual frontage townhouses that are proposed along Ball Gate, back-to-back townhouses, which is the slightly darker shade that you can see, and then a mixture of semi-detached and a couple different single detached unit types throughout the plan. Building on this is the pedestrian circulation plan, subject to review by city staff and comments. The proposal is for 2 sidewalks to be located on each of Fenchurch and Ball Gate, and single sidewalks to service the individual local streets. You'll see the street pattern is effectively what's called a modified grid. So there's no cul-de-sacs or curvilinear roads for the most part. There's slight bends in radius, but maintaining the true intent of a modified grid. And then there's these pink lines represent recreational trails that will be integrated into the stormwater management ponds, as well as through the environmental protection area. Note that this is just conceptual in nature, however. Moving to the eastern application now, this is 560 Lockhart Road. Again, the large green is environmental protection that will be conveyed to the city. The stormwater management ponds, again, there's effectively 5 hectares of stormwater management ponds on this land that will service this site plus lands to the north and lands to the east. So there's a lot less area that's actually available for lotting on this particular plan. Once you take out the storm ponds and the environmental protection areas, you're left with considerably less. You will see that, as I shown you on the 460 Lockhart, Fenchurch Manor will continue to extend and ultimately connect up to Madeline. Madeline goes left up to Mapleview Drive, and then Madeline goes right or east to Yonge Street. So that's a major collector, and then there's a minor collector on Lower Street, which is connecting eastwards into the Mattamy subdivision. And this plan contains a number of semi-detached and single-detached lots, and then all these light mauve color along the edges are all part lots and blocks that will be developed in accordance with the adjacent Mattamy subdivision. And again, moving on to the pedestrian circulation plan. Again, dual sidewalks are proposed along Fenchurch, Lower Street, which are collector roads, and then along a local street right here, which will run eastward and connect to a large community park. And then pedestrian trails in pink as around the stormwater management area and connecting into the environmental protection areas. Quick fun slide with some stats. Overall, there's 593 units. As I alluded to in the stormwater management ponds, there's 4 of them, almost 10 hectares of land for stormwater management. There's over 16 hectares of environmental protection lands. And the density is at 48 people and jobs per hectare, about 1,700 people and jobs overall in these 2 sites, largely influenced by the amount of EP and stormwater management lands on these subdivisions. 2 slides and then I'm done. This is the zoning schedule for 460 Lockhart. This kind of upper level stipple pattern is natural heritage or environmental protection zoning is what is proposed for this. The residential singles and semis would be zoned, along with the stormwater management ponds, would be zoned R5. And then the back-to-backs and dual frontage towns would be zoned RM3 under the proposed zoning bylaw amendment before the city. And the last slide is the 560 Lockhart Road zoning bylaw schedule. Again, the stipple pattern presents the environmental protection block that will be conveyed to the city of Barrie. And then the balance of the storm ponds and the semis and singles would be zoned in the R5 category. In both cases, there's no special provisions required nor proposed as part of this application. And your worship, members of Planning Committee, I'd be happy to answer any questions that arise. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Duhamel, for walking us through how times have changed. 2 subdivisions that do reflect a much different way of building our new communities than in the past. I will go to Ms. Duhamel for an update on the status of these applications.
Thank you very much, Mayor Lehman. And much like Mr. Duhamel, I am going to just speak about both of these applications at the same time. And as always, thank you for the introduction. So the applications are for the zoning bylaw amendments and draft plan of subdivisions at 460 Lockhart Road and 560 Lockhart Road. 460 proposing 394 residential units with varying single detached units, street townhouses, back-to-back townhomes, and several future blocks, whereas 560 is proposing 190 residential units with varying sizes as well. And there was no neighborhood meeting for either project. This was due to the limited number of properties within our normal circulation radius for these projects. And so it's not really unusual for us not to proceed with a neighborhood meeting in the secondary plan area. Eventually more people will be living there and it'll be more necessary. But at this time, as I said, we do take a look at that each time. So staff are definitely undergoing the technical review with planning staff, as well as all of our internal and external agencies. We are taking a look at compliance with the provincial planning policy, the city's official plan, as well as the secondary plan. As always, we look at the compatibility and integration of the surrounding land uses, including the streets and trails with the adjacent developments. We take a look at the intensification targets for population and employment, always making sure that the natural heritage evaluation and recommendations out of those reports, including any sort of environmental impacts and the long-term protection of environmental features, as well as those that get conveyed to the city. So we'll take a look at that. Impacts on traffic and the interface with these two projects, and then just confirmation that the proposed development can be supported by either existing and planned infrastructure. So all the comments that we received during the technical review, as well as what we might hear tonight, will be included and addressed in the staff report. The intention is to bring the staff report back to council or planning committee before the end of the second quarter of 2022. So hopefully before the summer recess. And that would be for the consideration of the zoning bylaw. Should council approve the zoning bylaw amendment, planning staff do have delegated approval to consider the draft plan of subdivision. All of the submission materials and key dates associated with the applications are on the city's proposed development webpage under Ward 9, and Shelby White is the file manager, and she can always be contacted directly. So thanks very much for your attention, and that concludes my presentation.
So you're talking about the development radiation, and I called you Ms. Duhamel. So we're having a great night, Ms. Banfield. Yeah. And thank you for thanking me for the introduction, even though I get that completely wrong, Ms. Banfield. Anyway, thanks for the update on the status, and apologies for that. Just a reminder again, if you're watching tonight, it is 797-5353 to call into our planning show. And cityclerks@barrie.ca if you wish to email us, and staff can get you the information right away to participate in the meeting. Madam Clerk, this brings us to the public comment portion. Have we had anyone call in?
There are no members of the public online.
Okay. Councillor Morales, this one is also in Ward 9, so any questions of clarification?
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. The triple Ward 9 meeting, planning meeting, 999 on this one, 3 files. Miss Banfield, a question for you. Can we as the city enforce that if this plan is approved at a later time, can we somehow enforce that when the units are marketed, either for this one or the existing Cerbera site, as I believe it was referred, can we make sure that it's clear that, hey, that phase is going to come in, maybe in 3 years, maybe in 5, maybe in 8, but that land is rezoned. I don't want another scenario where residents go, oh, I walked my dog on that field. That's great, but nobody told me. Or even worse, I noticed Mr. Duhamel pointed some of the EP land. I want it to be absolutely clear, because I believe in the early 2000s, and this is to learn lessons, not to go back and put blame, but in the early 2000s, in different areas across the city and probably elsewhere, official EP versus, well, it's technically not EP, but maybe the realtor accidentally, innocently verbalizing it. Oh yeah, I think it's EP. And all of a sudden it gets in people's heads. And, they always assumed it was. So is there an ability from our point that the marketing is absolutely clear in referring to what is EP and how that works? So we have proper integration and expectations for a development like this?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Morales. So Mr. Duhamel's smiling. We have actually, it's a part of draft plan approval is to do what's called a community information map. And he's smiling because we go back and forth between himself and my team a lot. And what exactly we need to tell people, what do they need to see? It really is very comprehensive in terms of where we expect there to be hydro boxes. And so we do have a pretty comprehensive map that's included, and it's prepared together between ourselves and the city. That's shared with all purchasers. It's part of the subdivision agreement, so it gets registered on title. So everybody, for the most part, we do work to make sure that people understand that. There always will be miscommunications and community sentiment that may not align with that, but from the outset, both the city and the developers work hard to get that map correct and make sure that prospective purchasers are aware.
Okay. Mr. Duhamel, do you have something to add to that point? Is your client, obviously willing and able to? Obviously, you can control resell units, 15, 20 years from now, but is your client committed to being abundantly clear as to obviously what is EP, what is not, and that information?
Thank you, Your Worship, through to Councillor Morales. Absolutely, the developers, and I can see this generically across all of Hewitt's as an example, or any other project, developers are not interested in misleading and having all kinds of backlash and blowback on that. So I can echo the comments that Michelle has made about this rather laborious community improvement map process that provides every detail you could, any purchaser could possibly expect. I think that it's quite clear, and even when it comes out to somebody coming to a sales center, if there's a model home or something, the EP area is fenced off with siltation fence and other areas. So I think I absolutely understand the context of what you're the examples that you're sharing about a couple of trees all of a sudden are EP. In fact, they weren't, but in this case, I think there's been very clear messaging going back many years on what is the core natural heritage features across Hewitt that need to be saved. And I think Michelle hopefully would say the same thing, that it's been walked in the field. Everybody knows the limits of those features. Perfect. Going back all the way to 2014, effectively. Perfect.
What a great year it was. For the EP land, I'm just eyeballing it, but am I safe to say it's around 30-something% of the total area that you're proposing for it to be EP? That's quite significant. I want to confirm that number, what that number is, because I think it's significant for people to realize how much of a contribution to EP it is for the city and for residents.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Morales, if it's all right, I can answer that question. There's 16.39 hectares of land, and the two sites combined are plus 19.72, 51.82. Yeah, it's 32% is natural heritage lands. And that includes a vegetated buffer that will be replanted as adjacent to the natural heritage features.
Perfect. Wow, that was Price is Right rules that didn't go over. Follow-up question for the road, that main road that you said connects to the to phase 1 lands. This came up at the neighborhood meeting we had last year with Mayor Lehman and myself in Ward 9. Concerns about Loon Avenue, concerns about roads. When you design roads too big, it encourages speeding. When you have a retaining pond, actually is probably the area that really gets that speeding, because people go, well, there's no driveways, no kid's fastball is going to roll down. I'm just going to speed it a little bit more. Creates that sense of speeding up. So it's widely understood that you reduce speeding at the design stage. And I'm just wondering, from your preliminary presentation, I'm a bit concerned that we're just repeating a bit of those mistakes of making very wide roads. And while I understand that's meant to be more of a collector road, speeding is, I don't want a future residents to be having this in concern, and for the comment to say, well, we should have had some vision. We could have made a couple of tweaks on reducing the meter widening on that. And then it just becomes actually a taxpayer bill because it's extra speed bumps, it's curb outs, it's things of that nature.
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Morales, my response to that is that I think your city staff have done a good job over the last 5 to 10 years of really changing how they look at applications when they get into the detailed design stage. And just case in point, there's a requirement as part of a complete engineering submission for any subdivision like this that a traffic management plan and traffic analysis is undertaken and provided with that detailed design. And that looks at everything from raised intersections, and it can look at, the locations of a variety of different, where bus stops are and different things. So I think staff do a good job at that. Ultimately, collector roads need to be provided to funnel traffic. Otherwise, certainly there are jurisdictions in the world where, much smaller streets are proposed. We, generally speaking, throughout Ontario, we go with the arterial and collector and local road formats. That's fairly universal across the stretch, but I think as long as there's traffic management and traffic calming that's reviewed as part of the detailed design, which is right on the checklist of things that staff focus on, I think that, hopefully at the end result, Councillor Morales is not, a major speedway with problems.
Okay, thank you for that answer. And Ms. Banfield, I don't need to comment on this one. I think I would like that to be addressed, the width, because it's moving forward. I put a little asterisk on that. Quick question. This one doesn't, you don't have to go into too much detail on this. Why, we don't need the technical detail. Why is a pond water, why is stormwater management with a pond versus the underwater design that it was my understanding the industry was moving towards?
Thank you, your worship, through to Councillor Morales. There is a need for stormwater management ponds depending on grade and basically the soil types and the water table. And so low impact development measures are incorporated into this overall design. They're incorporated throughout all the designs in Hewitts. And some ponds, for example, off of up closer to Big Bay Point, where there's really terrific soils, they have underground storage tanks and a much, the elimination in that case of a wet pond. In some areas in Hewitts, there's a higher groundwater table. And so there's different low impact development measures that have to be reviewed and integrated, but there's still a need for wet ponds and different types of ponds as part of the detailed design and review. So ultimately, that's one of your memorandum of service with the Lakes and Port Region Conservation Authority looks at. There's low impact development targets, there's phosphorus targets, and city staff, of course, understand all those things and look at that, and the incorporation of jellyfish into your catch basins and a variety of other technical matters that would probably bore everyone to death on this call. But needless to say, that's a major part of the technical review. It wasn't 20 years ago. I can tell you that with absolute clarity. But it dominates the detailed design now. The actual grading and placement of pipes is the easy part. It's the stormwater management, low impact development, phosphorus, water budget. Those are the items that take the lion's share of the time on the detailed design side of things.
Perfect, site specific. Thank you, Mr. Duhamel. One of my other questions, where's the village square to be blend? Where's the 15-minute walkability? So a lot of, like myself, I know there's been maybe comments from politicians before and city staff. We want to make the secondary lands more walkable. The language village squares, 15-minute walk to a lot of what you need, not necessarily everything in smart design. I don't see a village square here. I didn't see a village square in the Sorbera lands. And that, so I'm seeing some nods. So like, I don't want to be in a situation where, like, maybe specifically for me, just speaking for myself, my word, I talked the talk and I told residents, we're doing long-term vision. We're doing new urbanism principles. We're going to follow the grid network that we have in the Northeast End. We're going to sustainable, responding to climate change, responding to mental health, responding to community design. And then all of a sudden, I see a lot of stormwater management ponds, don't see village squares, I don't see commercial. A lot of the comments I hear from the existing residents in that subdivision to the west called Country Club Estates is they don't feel safe letting their kids walk to the Max Plaza on Huronia because there's no side, there's kind of a pathway to the side, but it's not the safest connection. And right now there's nothing for them to do right there. This was a great opportunity to incorporate some sort of village square, if you will, even if it's a convenience store and rent, whatever it is, that makes it more of a cohesive, comprehensive community.
So, Councillor, I'll just remind you, question of clarification. Go ahead, Mr. Duhamel, give us the answer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Councillor Morales. Mr. Morales, I think you are speaking about Village Square in the context of mixed use and a community commercial node, as opposed to a Village Square in the context of parkland, I think is what your question is, because there is a master parkland agreement that was vetted through staff. and identifies where all the village squares and community parks. And while this site is where it's located, it happens to be immediately adjacent to a park to the north, immediately adjacent to a community park to the east, and immediately adjacent to a park to the west. So they're certainly parkland. If you're talking about specifically mixed use and commercial, one of the challenges, and it's always existed when you have a boundary road such as Lockhart, is providing commercial when half of the area that services that is located on the south side is located across the street from farm fields, and the other part of it is looking at this area south of and west of the EP area is quite confined. Now there are commercial developments that are proposed on the Bemp site. There's commercial that's proposed along Yonge Street, as I think everyone knows. So there is commercial, and there's a commercial block on the adjacent Mattamy subdivision. So there are commercial parcels proposed in Hewitt's west of Yonge Street, but it's not specifically proposed. And I'm certain that the planning staff will review your comment, of course, and consider all those items as part of the review and approval.
Perfect. As a follow-up question of clarification, is there a reason why it's not being proposed to even have a small, like I'm talking a circle, I don't want to pick a specific business. I'm thinking a small corner convenience store on one of your proposed street. Think of 0.01 hectares kind of surface area, maybe even 0.09, where it's just like you're essentially at your convenience store, something that is almost standalone and would be serviced in that walkable radius by these two proposed sites and maybe even the survey and the existing. Is there specific so my question is, is there a specific reason why that wasn't in the application?
Your worship, through to Councillor Morales, yeah, there is a very specific reason. This is a very experienced developer and development team and project management team, and they have a lot of experience with commercial sites and different developments. And the success of those commercial sites, which you don't want, is something that's proposed for a convenience area and never materializes, are in large part dependent upon being on arterial roads that have fulsome development around it. And when you have edge and perimeter locations, such as the case is Lockhart Road, you only need to go back in time and look at some of the edge locations in Barrie, going back even 20 years, and you will note that some of the challenges that those commercial sites have had when they're on the edge and they're not fully, there's not a great trade area that supports them. So the real answer is they're concerned about the viability of a site on that location. If ultimately the determination is made that a small site is needed, that's something that will have to be identified through the review process, and we'll have to respond to those.
Perfect. And my final question for clarification, similar to the previous meeting, is where you have your back-to-backs and some of your higher order density seems like a great opportunity to throw up a 4-story, a 5-story, a 6-story. Once again, I'm referencing the one off Veterans in that little triangle. There were some different types of built form in that area. The 5-1 clearly was approved and is going forward. On this Lockhart Road, I'm wondering if we could have a little bit more density fronting Lockhart where you have some of that density. And even if it ends up just being maybe a mixed use, you could even incorporate reasonable commercial in the bottom and maybe solve two concerns with one. Is there a specific reason why a wood frame building fronting Lockhart wasn't considered, and instead your client went with what was shown?
A large part of the consideration of site is looking at all the planning inputs and then looking at what the developer would like to construct on the lands and trying to marry those things together. In this particular case, the mixed use block there is a mixed use block on the Sorbera lands that has to go through its own approval process immediately to the west. And then on this site, the mixed use block is actually only a small portion of what we have shown for back-to-back townhouses. So we've actually spread the density out a little bit more, but provided those extra units just over a little bit larger footprint, effectively south of Fenchurch Manor and east of Ball Gate. So that's how the design response was provided. Again, I think Michelle Banfield's on the call. She's hearing what you're saying, and that'll be something that's considered as part of the review of this application.
My name is Kyle Galvin. I'm a senior planner and registered professional planner at Innovative Planning Solutions here in Barrie, representing the owners of the lands located at 571 Huronia Road. This evening, I will be introducing you to a development concept for a proposed application for zoning bylaw amendment, and welcome any questions and feedback you may have on the proposal. The subject site is located in the southern end of Barrie at the northeast corner of Huronia Road and Mapleview Drive. The subject's lands are highlighted in red in this image. The total site area of the property is approximately 3.8 hectares or 38,000 square meters, but only the southwestern corner of the property is proposed to be developed at this time. This area is approximately 0.6 hectares or 6,800 square meters in size. Moving forward, I'll be referring to this area as a subject site. The subject site has two frontages, including approximately 69 meters of frontage on Mapleview Drive East and 77 meters of frontage onto Huronia Road, both of which are municipal arterial roads. Currently, the land sits vacant with limited existing tree coverage and is mostly flat. This is the site in its current condition, well, back when it was a bit warmer. We are looking northeast at the subject site from the corner of Huronia Road and Mapleview Drive. These images are the existing frontages along Mapleview Drive East and Huronia Road. The image on the left is the frontage along Mapleview, and the image on the right is the frontage along Huronia. This slide illustrates the land use designation that currently applies to the subject lands. The lands are designated as general industrial in the city's official plan. The majority of the lands surrounding the subject site are also designated general industrial, except for the site that sits kitty corner on the northwest corner of Huronia and Mapleview, which is designated general commercial. It's the Fernbrook Mapleview Center. This slide shows the current zoning for the subject site, which is similar to its official plan designation. This site is currently zoned light industrial in the city zoning bylaw. As you can see, the surrounding lands are also mostly zoned light industrial, again with the southwest corner being zoned general and commercial. This slide shows an aerial view of the site and its surrounding land uses, which include industrial to the north, south, and west, including a golf course across the street. Commercial lands, as described earlier, are located to the southwest, and environmentally protected areas to the northeast and across the street to the west and south. Low density residential is located to the far east and southeast. This slide shows the development concept. The proposal includes a multi-tenant building, including a restaurant with drive-through, convenience store, and gas station at the southwest corner of the site, as well as a car wash located along the northern edge of the site. Access is provided off both Mapleview Drive and Huronia Road, and the total GFA for the proposed development is approximately 659 square meters. The hatched areas along the frontage of the site represent a potential road widening dedicated to the city. The green areas of the concept are proposed to be landscaped areas surrounding the proposal, buffering them from the remainder of the subject site. This slide speaks to the current and proposed zoning provisions for the subject site. The zoning table located on the right-hand side of the slide details the provisions that are required and proposed. In terms of the zoning bylaw amendment itself, the proposal is seeking 3 special provisions to the existing light industrial zoning. The first is to permit a gas bar as a use on the property. The proposed car wash, restaurant, and convenience store are already permitted uses on the site. The second is to increase the GFA of the restaurant in excess of the permitted 25% of the total floor area to 54%. And the third is to allow a reduced rear yard setback of 3 meters. In conclusion, the proposed zoning bylaw amendment is being sought to permit the use of a gas station on a lot on lands designated for light industrial use within the city. The gas station use is seen as a complementary to the other permitted uses in the light industrial zone. It helps to promote the success of the convenience store, drive-through restaurant, and car wash uses. In this way, they have a symbiotic relationship and rely on one another for success. The gas station will serve the greater industrial area and promote the overall development of the industrial lands. Gas stations are commonly found in proximity to or within industrial areas throughout the city. The development represents an official use of the subject lands, providing an appropriate use and built form to integrate with the surrounding area. It represents small scale, low density growth within Barrie's built up area and is supported by all levels of policy. This concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions you may have at this time. Thanks.
I will now ask Ms. Banfield, our Director of Development Services, just to give us a quick update on the status of the application.
Thank you very much, Mayor Lehman, for the introduction, and good evening to everyone on Planning Committee. So the applicant is proposing to amend the light industrial zoning on the subject lands for the special provisions to permit the gas station use in addition to the restaurants, and that exceeds some of the provisions in our light industrial zone, in particular as it relates to not being in a multi-tenanted building. So there was a neighborhood meeting held for this back in December of 2020, virtual at that time. It was attended by about 15 residents, the ward councillor, planning staff, and the consultants team. So we did hear some comments about traffic concerns, potentially an increase in traffic that's going to be generated in particular along Huronia Road, and concerns related to vehicle stacking at that entrance. Potential impacts on the adjacent natural heritage resources, their ecological functions as a result of the proposed development. How the proposed development will interface and integrate with the remainder of the site that's not proposed to be developed at this time. We really want to make sure that allowing this provision or this application to go through isn't going to limit the options for the development of the remainder of the property. In particular, people were asking about what the plans were for the remainder of the property, as well as, how the development is, as I said, just going to operate. So we did receive some correspondence from the public in advance of this public meeting, notwithstanding that no one registered to speak. And that was, again, related to traffic concerns, specifically related to the vehicles on Huronia. So the technical review is underway by the usual suspects, planning staff, the city's technical review department, and the external agencies. The primary planning and land use matters that we're all contending with at the moment is compliance to the provincial policy statement, the city's official plan, the appropriateness of the proposed development, the justification of the requested site-specific provisions, as always, the site servicing, drainage, grading associated with the development, traffic impacts, and any impacts on the natural heritage resources and the ecological function. As always, all of the comments that we received during the technical review process, as well as what we hear this evening, will be included and addressed in the planning staff report that is intended to come to Planning Committee likely before the summer recess, the end of Q2 in 2022. As always, everything is on the website. The submission materials, key dates are on the city's proposed development webpage under Ward 9, and the file manager is Tyler Butler, and people are always able to contact him directly. Thanks very much for your attention.
I will go to the ward councillor, Councillor Morales, to see if you have any questions or clarification on this one.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Mr. Galvin, a quick question. Is there a functional reason or technical reason why your client is seeking rezoning of only a portion of the parcel and leaving the remaining parcel as is for now, instead of doing a comprehensive ask and then maybe altering it later, or maybe coming back at a future time?
Yes, so this corner doesn't have a couple of the limitations that the rest of the site has. There's some environmental studies that need to be done on the larger piece, as well as some technical issues related to the geotech. My client is still looking at exactly what can go there and what would be appropriate, and wanted to proceed with this in the corner.
Oh, yep, that makes total sense. My other question was the follows. I obviously saw the design. I appreciate the fact that you're, at least your rendering is pushing the massing to the front, right? We want to follow new urbanism principles. It's worked really well at a couple of gas stations that I've seen. The one across from the fire station has fake windows, but it's new urbanism principles. So these things work. Is there a specific reason why the applicant is not proposing, a 5-6 story building at this corner? Obviously, it just seems a little bit underutilized. And one of your key portions in your slide actually said this meets low density targets or low impact. Some people might see that as a positive. I actually see that as a bit of a lost opportunity on a corner like this, just because, again, I'm not the expert, but the site seems big enough to maybe accommodate a building similar to what was done in Ward 6 in that little triangle at Veterans beside the Starbucks and that road. There's a 5-story building being proposed. So obviously the sites are different, but I'm wondering if there's a technical limitation or maybe just your applicant doesn't want to.
Well, again, there is a technical limitation based on the soils. So we're finding it a little bit difficult to get bigger buildings based on the soils without having to rip all them out. But the other issue is the permitted uses in light industrial. So without having to go through an OPA process, if we wanted to do a big commercial development there, it'd be a longer process.
A big commercial one or a big residential one? Sorry, just to clarify. Either
one. Like residential would also need to go through that OPA process, and the current and draft official plan is still contemplating the designation as industrial.
Gotcha. If the future plan was revised with RM2 or a variant of that, basically residential density, is your client open to basically reevaluating the proposal for some residential density, or is that just something that they're just not interested in?
I honestly am not sure. I would absolutely love to take that back to him and let him know that's a comment. I would hope that he would be open to it, because I think it would be a good use of the land for residential purposes. But unfortunately, I don't want to speak for him, so that's I don't know.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Through you to Ms. Banfield. This is going to be left fielder, but I've got 2 questions that relate to the conversations tied to the presentations this evening. So the first one around gas stations. So in no way is it being critical of that, but we had a very interesting active transportation and sustainability meeting this morning where we talked a bit about the rapid progress of electric vehicles. And so as developments are coming forward and gas stations may be proposed, do we know or are we forecasting any type of change in the demand use for gas stations as we build out some of our, as we build out? And what complications might we see around how easy it is to convert gas stations if we see in the next 10 to 15 years an interest in actually converting that to other uses? How is that being looked at with that whole field of electric vehicles perhaps impacting some of the assets we have around how we use, the use of gas stations and or the development of gas stations?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Kungl, that's a great question. It's something we were actually talking about at a staff level as we were talking about the zoning bylaw. And as always, we talk about, things that we want to do versus things that we actually want to actually see happen and regulate. And so we actually, I don't have answers for you, but I can just say to you that it is something that that we talked about in terms of, if we did want to move to a requirement piece and then require a certain amount of chargers, what does that look like? What would be an appropriate number? Those sorts of things for the private properties, like for the stuff that you're talking about. So I don't have answers, but I definitely know that we have staff amongst ourselves have raised it, and I do think it came from conversations with Brett on my team about that. We definitely are looking at putting that together as part of the zoning bylaw work.
Okay, great, thank you. I just didn't know if we needed to table that at a particular committee meeting for conversation, if it was timely, but I respect that, and we'll keen to hear where that's going in the future. My second question, if I may, through you, Mayor Lehman, to Ms. Banfield again. So thinking about, I'll use Mr. Duhamel's presentation where we've got over 16 hectares of environmentally protected land that's being conveyed for stewardship. We also, when we talk about planning and development proposals that are zoned natural heritage, I didn't know how the city views this. So if they're not designated in the future as park, do we actually look at all of that, I'll call it just green space, around the potential to infill it to, so I know in our OP we talk about enhancing the tree canopy and wanting to see that grow. Do we pretty well just accept that and it's kind of stays in place? Or do we, from a parks and forestry or from an environmental perspective, actually look at infilling some of that land with trees or other type of native species related to climate action?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Kungl, that's a good question. I mean, I know certainly from through the development review process, you know, anything that's environmental, we simply acquire. It actually doesn't count towards anybody's calculation of cash in lieu of parkland. That's also required. So it is an addition. As we kind of say, it's like the price of admission, just for showing up. We take that. And so for the most part, as I said, we take it, we usually fence it or sign it. And it really actually depends on the system itself, you know, what actually happens with it. But I can see what our operations team, most times I think we do kind of leave it, with the exception of when we actually start putting trails in, obviously through some of the EP, then you'll see some trail maintenance and those sorts of things over time. But I can get a bit more detail for you in terms of, you know, kind of what we do with it. In particular, these more raw, I think you're talking more about like the raw pieces of property, that sort of thing.
Great, thank you. I appreciate it.
That was the update from a recent planning committee meeting. Thank you for watching.